You look absolutely perfect. My friend Caleb was pacing around my apartment while I nervously adjusted my shirt for what felt like the 100th time. Today was my first blind date, and honestly I was terrified. Caleb had arranged this entire setup through his cousin, someone he described as mysterious, successful, and extremely handsome. I hadn't even seen a profile picture because Caleb kept insisting that the surprise element is essential for romance. I checked my phone once more, rereading the message. 7 p.m. The Golden Iris. Wear a red tie so I can recognize you. The Golden Iris. That name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place where I'd heard it before. Maybe someone at the office had mentioned it casually. Justin, let's go already. Caleb gave me a light push toward the door. Your date is waiting. I mean, he's waiting for you, and trust me, you're going to like him. I took a deep breath, grabbed my coat, and headed out of the building. The taxi ride was consumed entirely by my attempts to control my racing nerves. First blind dates are never easy, and I was already imagining all the ways I might say something stupid or fall into awkward silence. When the taxi dropped me off in front of the restaurant, my jaw literally dropped. The Golden Iris was magnificent. Glittering crystal chandeliers hung from soaring ceilings. Rich velvet curtains framed tall windows, and soft piano music floated through the air, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. The place looked so expensive and lavish that I doubted my entire month's salary could cover a single dinner here. I self-consciously checked my shirt again, wondering if I even belonged in a place like this. I walked inside, showing my red tie to the hostess at the entrance so she could identify me. She gave me a professional smile and said, "Ah yes, the red tie, table 8. Right this way, sir." My heart was racing as she led me through the lavish dining area. The tables were intimately spaced, each one decorated with flickering candles, and couples were quietly engaged in romantic conversations. This place wasn't just romantic, it was intoxicatingly intimate, and I suddenly realized this date might be far more serious than I'd anticipated. At table 8, someone was already seated comfortably, his back turned toward me. Dark hair neatly styled, broad shoulders filling out an expensive-looking suit jacket, and his posture was confident and composed. I gave a nervous smile and slowly approached the table, discreetly wiping my sweaty palms on my pants. "Hi, I'm Justin," I started to say, but then something entirely unexpected happened. From the main entrance of the restaurant came a voice, deep, commanding, and unmistakably familiar. A voice that sent immediate chills down my spine, whether I was at the office or anywhere else. "Table for one, please." My entire body froze. I slowly, almost mechanically turned toward the entrance, and there he was, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his presence commanding immediate attention. Wayne Cross, my CEO, my strict, impossibly intimidating, emotionless boss, who never smiled and whose single glance could silence the entire office. And he was here, in this exact restaurant. Right now, my mind immediately went into overdrive. Wayne was here, my CEO who noticed every single one of my mistakes, whose standards were so impossibly high that people in the office called him the Ice King. And I was here on a blind date wearing a red tie, clearly spending personal time on a Friday night. Panic mode fully activated, I quickly turned my face back toward table 8, desperately hoping that Wayne wouldn't notice me if I just focused on my date. My date's back was still turned toward me, and I silently prayed he would turn around quickly so I could sit down and somehow become invisible to Wayne's radar. But fate clearly had other plans. "Justin?" Wayne's voice. Deep, direct, and terrifyingly close, right behind me. I turned around painfully slowly, almost as if I hoped that moving in slow motion might somehow change reality. Wayne stood there, his steel gray eyes precisely locked onto me, one eyebrow perfectly raised in unmistakable surprise. His expression was carefully neutral, but his body language clearly showed confusion and slight irritation. "Sir," I squeaked, immediately cringing at how pathetically high-pitched my voice came out. Internal humiliation level, maximum. I'm here on a date?" He flatly completed my sentence, his gaze deliberately flicking to my conspicuous red tie before settling back on my visibly flushed face. Yes, I barely managed to admit, actively wishing the floor would suddenly open up and swallow me, rescuing me from this humiliating situation. Wayne slowly scanned the restaurant, his sharp gaze assessing everything with typical precision, then focused on table 8 directly behind me, where my date was still peacefully seated, casually reading the menu, blissfully unaware of how happy this situation was becoming awkward. Wayne's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a subtle sign I'd learned to recognize at the office. It was the first warning of his irritation. "Interesting choice of venue," he said dryly, almost sarcastically. "This restaurant is my regular Friday spot. I usually come here to unwind." Of course it was. That's why the name had sounded so familiar. I definitely heard someone at the office mention that CEO Cross goes here every Friday for a quiet dinner. And here I was, on a Friday night, in his favorite private sanctuary, on a blind date wearing a bright red tie like a signal flare. This situation was literally the worst-case scenario. I had absolutely no idea. I quickly defended myself, my words tumbling out nervously. "My date chose this specific place. He made the booking. I was just told to come here." "Justin." A cheerful, completely oblivious voice interrupted me. I turned around and finally got a proper look at my date, who was now standing and enthusiastically waving in my direction. And when I fully saw him, my breath involuntarily caught. He was genuinely gorgeous. Warm hazel eyes that shone with friendly curiosity, a sharp jawline with perfectly groomed stubble, and an open, welcoming smile that was instantly likable. Exactly as Caleb had excitedly described, a total package. But right now, in this exact moment, Wayne was standing here, silently observing me, and the situation had become painfully, excruciatingly awkward. I was literally caught between two worlds, my professional life and my personal life, and they were colliding spectacularly. "1 second. I awkwardly mumbled to Wayne and quickly moved toward my waiting date, desperately trying to escape Wayne's penetrating gaze. I approached the table, forcing a smile as naturally as I could manage. "Hi. Sorry, I'm not late, am I?" "No, not at all," he warmly assured me, confidently extending his hand. "You're exactly on time. I'm Troy." "Justin," I said, firmly shaking his hand. His grip was strong and confident, normally a good sign. "Please, have a seat," Troy graciously gestured toward the chair. But I couldn't sit comfortably, because in my acutely aware peripheral vision, Wayne was still standing at the entrance, discussing something in a low voice with the hostess. And then, to my absolute horror and disbelief, the hostess began politely guiding Wayne toward table 9. Table 9, literally right next to our table, less than 4 feet away. This was a joke. This was definitely a cosmic joke. The universe was personally targeting me. "Justin, are you all right?" Troy asked with a genuinely concerned expression, clearly noticing my visible distress. Yes, I'm perfectly fine," I unconvincingly assured him and quickly sat down, very deliberately positioning my chair so my back would block Wayne's direct line of sight. Maybe if I didn't look at him he would ignore me too. Troy enthusiastically picked up the menu. "This place is genuinely amazing. I've heard their seafood dishes are legendary. Absolutely must try." I mechanically nodded, barely processing what he was saying, because on my immediate right side, literally an uncomfortable table's distance away, Wayne Cross had quietly and precisely seated himself, meticulously adjusting his jacket and settling into his seat with practiced ease. And then, almost as if it were deliberate, he slowly looked in my direction, direct, unwavering eye contact. My stomach violently flipped. I desperately laser-focused my gaze on Troy, pasting on a smile as if my life depended on it. "Yes, seafood sounds absolutely perfect." Troy was comfortably smiling, clearly completely relaxed and enjoying the situation. He had no idea how rapidly my internal panic level was rising. "So Caleb told me some genuinely great things about you. He said you're rebelly hard-working and your work ethic is impressive. You're in corporate, right?" "Yes," I said, nervously fidgeting with my already perfectly placed water glass. "I'm, an assistant at a company," deliberately vague. If I gave specific details, the conversation could go anywhere. And Wayne was obviously listening. "Oh, cool. What's your boss like? Supportive or the demanding type?" Troy asked casually. A completely innocent question. I internally nearly choked. "Boss?" I unnaturally repeated, painfully and acutely aware that literally my demanding boss was sitting one table away, probably listening to every single word with his characteristically sharp attention. Yeah, Troy easily continued. I'm curious because corporate culture varies so much. Some bosses are genuinely mentors and others are, well, tyrants. I uncomfortably hesitated. Should I actually be honest? That my boss was intimidating, a perfectionist to an almost obsessive degree and impossibly difficult to read. That his presence alone could silence the entire office instantly. That I sometimes woke up at night anxious about his curt, demanding emails. He's strict, I very carefully chose my words. But ultimately fair. He maintains high standards, professional, diplomatic, safe. Sounds pretty intense, Troy said sympathetically, nodding understandingly. I honestly feel lucky that I freelance, complete creative freedom, no bosses breathing down my neck. I gave a polite, somewhat forced laugh, but my traitorous attention involuntarily shifted magnetically toward Wayne. He was apparently focused on his phone, one hand casually and gracefully resting on the table, but his posture was subtly stiff, tension carefully concealed but definitely present, as if he were deliberately listening.
No.
I was definitely overthinking this. Being paranoid, Troy enthusiastically continued the conversation, animatedly telling me about his diverse work, graphic design, interesting freelance projects for international clients, occasional travel for inspiration. He was a genuinely interesting person, authentic and surprisingly easy to talk to. I was actually properly enjoying his company, if only Wayne's overwhelmingly distracting presence weren't constantly in the background. The waiter finally arrived to carefully take our orders, and while Troy was giving his elaborately detailed order, clearly a food enthusiast, I took a calculated, risky glance in Wayne's exact direction. Catastrophic mistake. Wayne was directly, unabashedly looking at me. His distinctive gray eyes were unnervingly intense, his expression characteristically unreadable but somehow penetrating, as if he were systematically dissecting every minute facial expression, every nervous gesture, every subtle reaction with clinical precision. I quickly looked away awkwardly, my face uncomfortably heating up. Justin, are you absolutely sure you're all right? Troy asked again in a concerned tone. You seem noticeably distracted and flushed. Is the temperature uncomfortable in here? I'm completely fine, I unconvincingly assured him. It's just, honestly, this is my first actual blind date. I'm probably more nervous than I thought. Troy's expression instantly softened, understanding and kind. Hey, seriously, no pressure at all. We're just here having a genuinely good time, getting to know each other. Just relax and be yourself. His sincere kindness momentarily made me feel better. Maybe I was unnecessarily stressing about the situation. Maybe I should deliberately stop focusing on Wayne and genuinely be present with Troy, who was clearly a great, genuine guy, putting in real effort. But then Wayne gave the waiter his characteristically precise order, and his voice, low, controlled, and impossibly, unnervingly close, sent distinct chills down my spine. Grilled salmon, cooked exactly medium rare, and a glass of your 2015 Merlot. Specific, controlled, unmistakably Wayne. I involuntarily shivered. I couldn't logically understand exactly why. Perhaps it was profoundly surreal, hearing my usually distant CEO so physically close in a completely different, intimate context. It was disorienting. Troy enthusiastically continued the conversation naturally, but my already divided brain was hopelessly split, half politely focused on Troy's engaging words, half uncomfortably hyper-aware of Wayne's quietly commanding presence. And the absolute worst part, I could distinctly feel Wayne's occasional deliberate glances in my direction, as if he were very intentionally keeping me constantly aware of his close presence, refusing to let me comfortably settle in. Then Troy suddenly mentioned casually, interesting fact, I've actually been here once before, with a close friend for a special occasion. He told me this place is surprisingly exclusive. Usually successful CEOs and high-level executives come here regularly. Pretty elite crowd. My stomach sickeningly dropped. Oh really? I weakly barely managed to say. Yeah. Actually, Troy casually looked around, completely oblivious. One time I saw some reportedly big corporate guy from a distance. Wayne Cross? You've probably heard his name. Pretty well known in business circles. I desperately wanted to disappear. Vanish. Cease existing. Why yes, I somehow managed to squeeze out. Pretty impressive guy from what I've heard. Brilliant but with an intense reputation. Troy chuckled good-naturedly. And right on absolutely perfect cue, Wayne deliberately picked up his wineglass slowly, took a measured sip with characteristic precision, and gave me a pointed, unmistakable look that clearly communicated I'm hearing every word. Everything. I felt trapped. Exposed. The conversation continued, but I was barely participating anymore, just giving automatic responses while internally spiraling. Troy was talking about his recent design project for a tech startup, his eyes bright with enthusiasm, but all I could think about was Wayne sitting mere feet away, witnessing everything. So what about you? Troy leaned forward slightly, genuinely interested. What do you do for fun outside of work? Any hobbies? I read mostly, I stammered. Mystery novels, thrillers. Nothing too exciting. That's cool. I've been trying to read more myself. Any recommendations? Before I could answer, I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I risked another quick glance toward Wayne's table. He had set down his wineglass and was now leaning back slightly in his chair. His posture deceptively relaxed, but his eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my heart skip. Our eyes met for a brief electric moment before I quickly looked away, my pulse racing. Justin? Troy's voice pulled me back. You zoned out there for a second. Sorry, I was just thinking about book recommendations. I lied smoothly. There's this great author, Gillian Flynn. You might enjoy her work. Troy smiled appreciatively. I'll definitely check her out. You know, despite your nerves, I'm really enjoying this. You're easy to talk to. His words were kind, genuine, and under normal circumstances, I would have been thrilled. Troy was everything someone could want in a date. Attractive, successful, kind, and genuinely interested. But nothing about this situation was normal. The waiter returned with our appetizers, and as he set down the plates, I caught movement from Wayne's table. He was looking at his phone, his expression unreadable, but there was a tension in his hellers that hadn't been there before. His salmon sat in front of him, barely touched. This looks incredible, Troy said, gesturing to the beautifully plated dish. Want to try some of mine? It was such a normal date-like thing to offer, but somehow it felt weighted, significant. I was acutely aware that we weren't alone, that every interaction was being observed. Sure, that would be nice, I managed to say, accepting a small portion he placed on my plate. As we ate, Troy kept the conversation flowing effortlessly, asking about my college experience, my career goals, my family. He was doing everything right, being the perfect date. And yet, I couldn't fully engage because part of my consciousness remained tethered to the man at the next table. Wayne had finally started eating, his movements precise and deliberate as always. Every so often, our eyes would accidentally meet, and each time it happened, something unspoken passed between us. Acknowledgement, tension, and I couldn't quite name. The evening was becoming increasingly surreal, caught between the date I was supposed to be having and the silent, charged presence of my CEO, whose very existence in this space was rewriting everything I thought I understood about professional boundaries. Dinner progressed slowly, and I was somehow managing to maintain a reasonably coherent conversation with Troy, despite my completely divided attention. He was genuinely interesting and engaging. We discussed music preferences, favorite films, dream travel destinations. Troy was clearly making an effort to help me feel comfortable, and normally I would have appreciated it wholeheartedly. But my focus kept drifting helplessly toward Wayne, who was silently and methodically working through his meal, occasionally typing briefly on his phone, occasionally just deliberately observing. And then a specific moment arrived that fundamentally changed everything. Troy politely excused himself to use the restroom, leaving me temporarily alone at the table. I finally took a deep, shaky breath, desperately trying to mentally reset and relax when Justin, Wayne's voice, low, direct, commanding, disturbingly close beside me. I completely froze and painfully slowly turned toward him with caution. Wayne was deliberately leaning slightly from his adjacent table in my exact direction, his expression carefully and intentionally neutral. Sir? I barely whispered, acutely and painfully aware that theoretically any nearby diner could witness this interaction. How is your date going? He asked almost casually, but there was something with a subtle edge in his controlled tone, something I couldn't quite identify. It's going well, I said awkwardly and stiffly. Troy is genuinely very nice. Wayne slowly rotated his wine glass, almost hypnotically, watching the liquid swirl inside. Troy. An interesting casual name. This was bizarre. Wayne never asked personal questions at the office. Never. He maintained strict professional boundaries. And here he was casually discussing the specifics of my personal date. Are you here completely alone tonight? I asked very cautiously and hesitantly. Wayne's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes. I characteristically come here on Friday evenings deliberately alone. A quiet dinner. Uninterrupted time to think and decompress. Oh. I genuinely didn't know how to respond appropriately. I'm sorry if we're unintentionally disturbing you. Wayne gave me a long, distinctly measured, penetrating look. You're not personally disturbing me, Justin. Not at all. But your date is unnecessarily loud. I nearly laughed internally. Despite the tension, Troy genuinely wasn't loud by any measure. He was simply friendly and naturally expressive. But Wayne probably found any reasonably animated person loud compared to his own characteristic icy, controlled silence. I could subtly suggest he speak a bit softer. Don't, Wayne firmly interrupted, his gaze suddenly intense. You should naturally and genuinely enjoy your date. Authentically, without self-censoring. There was something distinctly odd in his specific tone that made me feel inexplicably uncomfortable. As if he were carefully testing my reaction. Or critically judging my choices. Sir, is everything genuinely all right? I asked carefully and hesitantly. Wayne deliberately paused, then slowly leaned back in his chair, creating slight distance. Perfectly fine. I was just genuinely curious. Curious? About exactly what? About what specific type of people you realistically prefer? He said almost too smoothly, then abruptly shifted his complete attention back to his phone, definitively and awkwardly ending the conversation. I sat there stunned, mentally replaying his words. What exactly had just happened? Had he genuinely just— Troy energetically returned, obliviously smiling. Sorry about that, the line was unexpectedly long. Did I miss anything interesting? No, I said immediately, too quickly, forcefully gathering my scattered composure. Everything is fine, but everything genuinely wasn't fine. Because when I involuntarily glanced toward Wayne again briefly, his distinctive eyes were already precisely focused on me, intense, deliberately unreadable, and something indefinably else that I couldn't confidently identify. Possessive? Jealous? Territorial? Or perhaps I was completely imagining it, projecting my own confusion. Dinner finally came to a gradual end. Troy insisted on paying the bill, graciously saying it was completely his treat as the one who had suggested the venue, and we both comfortably prepared to leave. This was genuinely wonderful, Troy said sincerely as we politely stood from the table. I honestly want to do this again, definitely. I enjoyed your company. Yes, I said with a genuine smile. Honestly meaning it. Definitely. I enjoyed it too, but as I automatically turned to respectfully leave, my helpless gaze fell one final time on Wayne involuntarily. He was characteristically still sitting there quietly, his meticulously ordered dinner surprisingly almost completely untouched, his long fingers slowly and rhythmically drumming subtly on the delicate rim of his wine glass, and his carefully controlled expression was noticeably dark, tense, almost barely contained. Something had shifted in the atmosphere around him. The relaxed veneer he'd maintained throughout the evening had cracked just enough for me to see something underneath. Something raw and unguarded that made my stomach tighten with apprehension and an emotion I didn't want to name. As Troy helped me with my coat near the entrance, I could feel Wayne's gaze burning into my back. I didn't need to turn around to confirm it. The weight of his attention was palpable, pressing against me like a physical force. Ready? Troy asked cheerfully, completely unaware of the silent storm brewing just tables away. Yes, I managed to say, though my voice sounded distant even to my own ears. As we walked toward the exit, I made the mistake of glancing back one last time. Wayne was still seated, but now he was watching us leave with an expression that could only be described as calculating. His gray eyes tracked our movement with predatory precision, and for a moment our gazes locked across the crowded restaurant. In that brief second something passed between us, an unspoken acknowledgement that this evening had irrevocably altered whatever professional relationship we'd maintained. The carefully constructed walls between boss and employee had developed serious cracks, and we both knew it. Then Troy's hand lightly touched my elbow, guiding me forward, and the connection broke. Troy graciously walked me outside the restaurant, into the softly lit evening. The night was pleasantly cool, and decorative streetlights cast a warm golden glow peacefully across the sidewalk. He had been sweet throughout, unfailingly polite, and refreshingly genuine, exactly what anyone would reasonably want in an ideal first date. I genuinely really enjoyed tonight, Troy said sincerely, his hands casually relaxed in his pockets. You're surprisingly easy to talk to, Justin. The conversation felt natural. Thanks, I said honestly, genuinely smiling despite the lingering tension still coiled in my chest. I did too, actually, so, can I confidently call you? Maybe we could realistically meet up next week for coffee. Yes, absolutely, I readily agreed. Troy leaned slightly forward, perhaps for a brief hug or a culturally appropriate cheek kiss, but I instinctively and almost reflexively stepped back abruptly. The moment became instantly awkward. Sorry, I quickly and apologetically said. I'm just naturally a slow mover in relationships. Troy smiled gracefully and understandingly. Absolutely no problem at all. I'll genuinely wait until you're comfortable. No pressure whatsoever. He gave a friendly goodbye wave and smoothly settled into a waiting taxi. I stood there quietly, my polite smile gradually fading because suddenly something felt indefinably and distinctly off. Incomplete, impressively smooth save. I literally jumped and whirled around, startled. Wayne was standing directly and unnervingly behind me. His expensive coat collar was deliberately turned up against the cool evening air, his hands characteristically and casually in his pockets with perfect composure, but his carefully neutral iris was subtly lethal. Sir, what are you doing here, exactly? I'm obviously leaving as well, Wayne said, with unnatural calm, deliberately cutting off my fumbling words. My personal driver will be arriving shortly. We both stood in uncomfortable silence. Awkward. Distinctly tense. Was it an overall good date? Wayne finally asked casually, his carefully controlled tone deceptively light, but his sharp eyes were noticeably darker than usual. Yes, I said extremely carefully, measuring each word. Troy is a genuinely nice person. Nice, Wayne slowly repeated, as if the simple word tasted inexplicably bitter. Yes, he certainly seemed nice. Very safe. I was increasingly confused. Wayne's specific tone was distinctly off, subtly sarcastic and unexpectedly annoyed. There was something significant he was deliberately not saying. Sir, is something genuine? Will you see him again? Wayne abruptly interrupted, surprisingly direct and cutting straight to the point. I automatically blinked. Perhaps realistically, he suggested casual coffee next week. Coffee, Wayne repeated flatly, his voice devoid of inflection. How predictably romantic. Sir, this is strictly a personal matter, I cautiously pointed out, trying to maintain some semblance of boundaries. You're absolutely correct. Wayne immediately agreed, but his penetrating gaze remained uncomfortably and firmly locked on me. Completely personal. And theoretically, I don't want to inappropriately interfere in your war life. However, he deliberately paused, then confidently stepped measurably closer. Significantly close. I reflexively held my breath tightly. However, I will honestly say one specific thing clearly, Justin. His controlled voice was unmistakably low and subtly dangerous. Troy is objectively good, demonstrably safe, entirely predictable. But do you realistically think he can genuinely and deeply understand you? Your core ambition, your intense drive, your carefully hidden complexity. My heart was painfully thudding in my chest. I honestly don't know. You definitely know, Wayne said firmly and confidently. And I know it perfectly well too. His overwhelming closeness was physically overwhelming. I could distinctly smell his signature cologne, unmistakably expensive and deliberately subtle. I could acutely feel his controlled body heat radiating toward me, and his intense eyes were penetratingly looking at me as if I were some complex puzzle he was methodically and desperately trying to solve. Sir, this is genuinely, Wayne, he said quietly, almost intimately. We're obviously not at the office, Justin. You can freely call me simply Wayne. My lips unconsciously parted, but no coherent words came out physically. This was completely surreal. Then a sleek, unmistakably expensive black car smoothly pulled up to the curb. The driver professionally and efficiently rolled down the window. "Mr. Cross, sir?" Wayne briefly nodded but deliberately didn't break eye contact with me consciously. "Yes." He meaningfully gestured toward the comfortable car. "Where exactly do you live? I can safely drop you home." "I'm fine independently." "Seriously, Justin." His tone was characteristically firm, non-negotiable. "The night has grown considerably late already. I will responsibly see you home securely. Don't argue about this logically." And that was definitely a clear order. Helplessly and almost automatically, I resignedly slipped into the car. The interior was luxurious, leather seats, subtle ambient lighting, and an almost oppressive silence that felt weighted with unspoken things. I sat rigidly, trying to process what was happening. This was my boss, my CEO, and I was in his private car alone after he'd just witnessed my entire date. Wayne settled into the seat beside me with practiced ease, maintaining a respectful distance but somehow still feeling impossibly close. The driver pulled smoothly into traffic without a word, professionally ignoring whatever dynamics were playing out in the back seat. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, acutely aware of every breath Wayne took, every slight movement he made. The tension in the confined space was suffocating. "You didn't answer my question earlier," Wayne said suddenly, breaking the silence. I turned to look at him, confused. "Which question?" "Whether you'll see him again." The car ride was profoundly silent but electrically charged with unspoken tension. Wayne sat composed in the passenger seat, uncomfortably close beside me, his commanding presence absolutely overwhelming in the confined space. The driver quietly and professionally navigated through traffic, completely and diplomatically unaware of exactly what intense emotions were silently brewing in the back seat. "Address?" Wayne asked softly, almost gently breaking the heavy silence. I mechanically gave my residential address clearly, and the driver efficiently adjusted the route mentally without comment. Several deliberately long minutes passed in heavy silence that felt suffocating. Then Wayne finally and deliberately spoke again. "You genuinely should know, Justin, that I've professionally known you closely for a complete year now, daily in the office environment. You're consistently and always impeccably professional, remarkably efficient, practically perfect in every measurable way." I genuinely didn't know where this specific conversation was exactly and meaningfully heading, so I remained cautiously and carefully silent, waiting. But today was distinctly different. Wayne deliberately continued, his focused gaze initially directed thoughtfully out the window. "I saw you completely differently tonight, genuinely nervous, unfiltered, authentically real. With Troy, you were unexpectedly vulnerable in ways I've never witnessed." My breath sharply hitched in my throat. "And I suddenly realized something," he said slowly and carefully, finally turning meaningfully toward me, "that I've never seen you this intimately close before. Never this naturally accessible to someone." "Sir Wayne? This is actually—" I was honestly jealous tonight. My entire world abruptly stopped. Wayne, my previously untouchable CEO, my characteristically emotionless and strictly professional boss, had just openly admitted that he was genuinely jealous. "What exactly?" I barely whispered audibly, my voice almost non-existent. Wayne turned toward me completely and deliberately, his raw expression unexpectedly vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. "Troy naturally had your undivided attention tonight. Your genuine smile, your spontaneous laugh, your complete mose." And I was physically sitting just one frustrating table away, helplessly watching everything unfold. And initially I honestly didn't want to admit this, but he deliberately paused, his jaw visibly tightening with tension. "I intensely wanted it to be me there with you instead." I was completely speechless, absolutely stunned into silence. "This is admittedly unprofessional," Wayne continued, deliberately controlling his vulnerable tone with visible effort. "I'm perfectly aware of that fact. I'm technically your direct boss. This line clearly shouldn't ever be crossed under any circumstances. But when I saw you tonight genuinely engaged and happy, I physically couldn't stop this feeling from overwhelming me." My heart was racing wildly in my chest. Was I actually dreaming this? Was this genuinely real and happening? "Wayne," I finally said shakily, my voice barely controlled and trembling, I honestly don't know exactly how to appropriately respond to what you're saying. Then don't say anything deliberately right now, he said gently, almost tenderly, his voice softening. Just quietly listen carefully to what I need to tell you. The car smoothly stopped directly in front of my familiar building. The driver remained characteristically silent, professionally and deliberately ignoring our clearly personal and intense conversation unfolding behind him. Wayne looked at me deeply, his gaze overwhelmingly intense and searching. I'm definitely not demanding that you immediately abandon Troy or cut off contact. I realistically cannot and will not authoritatively control your personal decisions about Eric Gix, but I am honestly and clearly telling you this. He deliberately paused for emphasis, then slowly and carefully raised his hand and incredibly gently placed it, barely touching my cheek. If you genuinely ever need someone who can truly and deeply understand you on every level, someone who sees beyond the professional facade you maintain, I'm consistently here. Always available. His deliberate touch was distinctly electric, sending shocks through my entire system. I could barely properly breathe, my chest tight with overwhelming emotion. And if you honestly want to take a real chance on exploring what this could possibly become, he whispered intimately, his thumb incredibly and gently brushing across my sensitive skin slowly and deliberately, then I will patiently wait for as long as necessary, until you personally feel emotionally ready and comfortable to take that step. Then he reluctantly and carefully dropped his warm hand away and measured his lean back into his seat, his professional composure gradually and deliberately returning like a mask sliding back into place. Good night, Justin. I almost mechanically and carefully exited the car, feeling completely dazed, thoroughly confused, and absolutely overwhelmed by everything that had just transpired. When I instinctively glanced back through the window, Wayne's distinctive car was already quietly pulling away, elegant red taillights gradually disappearing into the night peacefully and leaving me standing alone. And I remained there completely alone on the sidewalk, reflexively placing my hand firmly against my racing chest, because my heart was still uncontrollably and wildly pounding against my ribcage. What would realistically happen tomorrow at the office exactly? Was Wayne genuinely serious about everything he'd just confessed? And Troy, what would I practically and responsibly do about him and the connection we'd started building tonight? My conflicted mind had absolutely no clear answers to any of these pressing questions. But one significant fact was absolutely and undeniably confirmed beyond any doubt. My previously predictable and carefully structured life would never realistically be the same simple existence it had been before tonight. Everything had fundamentally shifted, and there was no returning to the comfortable ignorance I'd maintained for the past year. The boundaries had been crossed. The words had been spoken, and now I had to decide what came next. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Wayne's intense gaze, felt the ghost of his touch on my cheek, heard his confession replaying endlessly in my mind. By the time my alarm went off Monday morning, I'd already been awake for 2 hours, staring at the ceiling and dreading what awaited me at the office. The commute felt surreal. I kept expecting to wake up and discover the entire weekend had been some elaborate stress-induced dream. But when I walked through the office doors at exactly 8:30, the familiar environment confirmed this was very much reality. I went straight to my desk, avoiding eye contact with everyone. My hands trembled slightly as I organized files and checked emails, trying desperately to fall into my usual routine. Maybe if I acted normal, everything would somehow reset itself. Justin, morning meeting in 15 minutes. My colleague Sarah called out cheerfully as she passed. Mr. Cross wants the quarterly reports reviewed. My stomach dropped. Of course, Monday morning meetings were standard. I'd have to face him in a professional setting, surrounded by other employees, and pretend Friday night never happened. I gathered my materials mechanically, double-checking everything 3 times because my concentration was completely shattered. When I finally headed toward the conference room, my legs felt unsteady. The room was already half full when I arrived. I chose a seat toward the middle, not too close to where Wayne typically sat, but not suspiciously far either. Colleagues filtered in gradually, discussing weekend plans and upcoming projects with easy familiarity. Then Wayne entered. He looked exactly as he always did, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, his expression composed and unreadable, his presence commanding immediate attention. The room quieted instantly as people settled into their seats. "Good morning," he said crisply, moving to the head of the table without sparing anyone a direct glance. "Let's begin with the quarterly analysis." His voice was perfectly professional, completely void of any warmth or personal recognition. It was as if Friday night existed in an entirely separate dimension that had no bearing on this reality. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt strangely hollow. The meeting proceeded normally. Wayne discussed projections, questioned strategies, and provided feedback with his characteristic precision. He addressed various team members by name, offering critiques and occasional praise where warranted. He didn't look at me once, not a single glance, not even when discussing sections of the report I'd specifically prepared. It was as though I'd become invisible, just another piece of furniture in the room. Halfway through the meeting, my phone buzzed silently in my pocket. I ignored it, keeping my focus on the presentation being discussed, but it buzzed again moments later. And then again. During a brief transition between speakers, I discreetly checked the screen under the table. 3 messages from Troy. "Had a great time Friday. Still thinking about our conversation. Would Thursday work for that coffee? There's a great place near the park. No pressure though. Just let me know when you're free." The messages were sweet, enthusiastic, exactly what I should want. Troy was kind, successful, uncomplicated. He represented safety and normalcy and a future without professional complications. I glanced up and found Wayne looking directly at me. Our eyes met for precisely 2 seconds before he smoothly redirected his attention to the speaker. But those 2 seconds carried the weight of everything unspoken between us. His expression remained perfectly neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. A question maybe, or a challenge. The meeting concluded shortly after. People gathered their materials and dispersed, returning to their individual tasks. I remained seated longer than necessary, pretending to review my notes while the room emptied. "Justin," I looked up. Wayne stood at the doorway, his hand resting casually on the frame. Everyone else had left. "My office, please. We need to discuss the Henderson account." His tone was purely professional, giving no indication of anything beyond standard business. But the Henderson account had been finalized weeks ago. I stood, gathering my materials with hands that weren't quite steady. "Of course, sir." We walked through the office in silence, maintaining appropriate professional distance. I was acutely aware of curious glances from colleagues, though they had no reason to suspect anything unusual. This was standard. Assistants were frequently called to the CEO's office. Wayne held the door open, allowing me to enter first, then closed it behind us with a soft click. The moment the door shut, the atmosphere shifted entirely. He didn't move toward me, didn't speak immediately. Instead, he walked to the window overlooking the city, his back to me, hands clasped behind him in a posture I recognized as his thinking stance. "Did you sleep well?" he asked quietly, still facing the window. The question was so unexpected, so intimate compared to the cold professionalism of the past hour, that I momentarily forgot how to respond. "Not particularly," I admitted honestly, seeing no point in lying. The exhaustion must have been visible on my face anyway. Wayne turned from the window, his expression softer than it had been in the conference room but still guarded. Neither did I. The confession hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. He moved to his desk but didn't sit, instead leaning against it with his arms crossed, studying me with that penetrating gaze that always made me feel simultaneously exposed and seen. "We need to establish parameters," he said finally, his voice low and measured. "I meant everything I said Friday night. Nothing has changed regarding my feelings, but I also recognize the position this places both of us in professionally." I nodded slowly, unsure where this was heading but grateful he was addressing the elephant in the room directly. "I will never use my position to pressure you or make you uncomfortable," Wayne continued firmly. "If you want to pursue something with Troy or anyone else, that's entirely your choice. I won't interfere and it won't affect your employment or how I treat you professionally. But," I prompted, sensing there was more. "But I also won't pretend I don't have these feelings," he said, his jaw tightening slightly. "I won't pursue you actively, but I'm also not going to lie if you ask me directees. You deserve honesty." It was such a Wayne approach, establishing clear boundaries, defining expectations, maintaining control even in an inherently messy situation. But there was something vulnerable underneath the professional framework. Something that made my chest ache. "What do you want from me?" I asked quietly. Wayne was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes searching mine. "I want you to have the freedom to make whatever choice feels right for you, without guilt or obligation. I want you to know that there's an option here with me if you decide that's what you want. And I want to continue working with you professionally regardless of what you decide personally, because you're exceptional at what you do." "That's a very diplomatic answer," I observed, trying to inject some lightness into the heavy atmosphere. His lips quirked slightly, almost a smile. "You want the undiplomatically honest answer?" I nodded, my heart rate accelerating. "I want you to choose me," he said bluntly, his voice dropping lower. "I want you to realize that what you felt with Troy was pleasant but superficial compared to what we could have. I want you to take the risk. Consequences be damned, but I also know that's unfair to ask. Which is why I won't." The raw honesty left me breathless. This was so unlike the controlled, measured Wayne everyone else knew. This was someone operating without his usual armor, and it was both terrifying and compelling. "I told Troy I'd meet him for coffee Thursday," I said, watching Wayne's reaction carefully. Something flickered across his face, disappointment maybe, or resignation, but he nodded. "That's reasonable. He seems like a decent person. You should explore that possibility." "You're really okay with that?" "No," Wayne admitted with stark honesty. "I hate the idea of it, but my feelings aren't your responsibility, Justin. You need to make choices based on what you want, not what I want." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed insistently on the desk. He glanced at it and grimaced. "Conference call in 5 minutes. I need to prepare." The moment was breaking, reality intruding on our temporary bubble of honesty. I moved toward the door, but his voice stopped me. "Justin," I turned back. "Regardless of what you decide, I need you to know something." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You've made this past year more bearable than you realize. Even just working with you, seeing you every day, has mattered to me. So thank you for that." The sincerity in his voice nearly undid me. I managed a shaky nod and left quickly before the emotion overwhelming me became visible. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions of my tasks, responded to emails, attended another meeting, but my mind was elsewhere entirely. By the time 5 o'clock arrived, I was emotionally exhausted. I was packing up my desk when my phone rang. Troy's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I just stared at it, my thumb hovering over the answer button. In my peripheral vision, through the glass walls of his office, I could see Wayne at his desk, focused intently on his computer screen. He must have sensed my gaze because he looked up suddenly, our eyes meeting across the distance. I answered the call. "Hey Troy," I said, watching something shift in Wayne's expression before he deliberately looked away. "Thursday sounds perfect." Thursday arrived faster than I wanted. I'd spent the intervening days in a strange state of emotional limbo, going through work motions with mechanical precision while my thoughts spun in endless circles. Wayne had maintained perfect professionalism, treating me exactly as he treated everyone else, which somehow made everything worse. The coffee shop Troy had chosen was charming, exposed brick walls, vintage furniture, and the rich aroma of fresh espresso. He was already there when I arrived, waving enthusiastically from a corner table. "Justin, I'm so glad you could make it," he greeted warmly as I approached. "I already ordered you a latte. I hope that's okay. You seemed like a latte person." "That's perfect, thank you," I said, settling into the chair across from him. He looked good, relaxed and happy, his hazel eyes bright with genuine pleasure at seeing me. We fell into easy conversation. Troy was a natural storyteller, animating his descriptions of a difficult client project with expressive gestures and self-deprecating humor. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, my interests, my family. He was attentive, present, interested. He was everything I should want. "You seem distracted," Troy observed gently after about 40 minutes. "Is everything all right?" I realized I'd been staring into my half-empty cup, my mind having wandered for the third time. "Sorry, I'm just dealing with some complicated work stuff." "It's not you." "Want to talk about it?" he offered. I'm a pretty good listener. The kindness in his offer made guilt twist in my stomach. "It's just politics and deadlines. Nothing interesting." Troy nodded acceptingly, but something in his expression suggested he didn't entirely believe me. He was perceptive, I'd have to remember that. Can I ask you something? He said after a moment, his tone shifting to something more serious. Of course. Are you actually interested in this? In us? He gestured between us. Because you seem like you're here physically, but somewhere else mentally, and I don't want to push if this isn't what you want. The directness caught me off guard. Yes, I am. You're great, Troy. Really great. But, he prompted gently. But I'm dealing with some personal confusion right now. I admitted carefully. It has nothing to do with you or anything you've done. I just need to figure some things out. Troy studied me thoughtfully for a long moment, then nodded. I appreciate the honesty. Look, I like you, Justin. I think we could have something good. But I also don't want to be Bond's backup option or distraction from something else. That's fair, I said quietly, respecting his clarity. So here's what I propose, Troy continued, leaning forward slightly. Take whatever time you need to sort out whatever you're dealing with. If you decide you want to explore this, genuinely want to, not just because it seems like the safe choice, then call me. I'll be here. But I'm not going to keep pursuing someone who's clearly got their attention elsewhere. The maturity and kindness of his response made me feel even worse about my divided state. You're being incredibly understanding about this. I've been where you are, he said with a slight smile. Caught between what makes sense and what feels right. It's not fun. I won't make it harder by adding pressure. We finished our coffee with lighter conversation, carefully avoiding anything too personal or future-oriented. When we parted outside the coffee shop, Troy gave me a brief friendly hug. Figure out what you want, Justin, he said quietly. Life's too short to spend it confused and conflicted. I watched him walk away, hands in his pockets, and felt the weight of decisions settling heavily on my shoulders. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, though I somehow knew immediately who it was from. How was coffee? Just 3 words, but they carried so much unspoken meaning. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. How did you get my personal number? HR database. Technically inappropriate but necessary. You didn't answer the question. Despite everything, I felt a smile tugging at my lips at his characteristic bluntness. It was good. He's a good person. The response came quickly. Are you going to see him again? I stood on the sidewalk, people flowing around me, city noise surrounding me, and realized I'd reached a decision point I could no longer avoid. I don't know yet. Can we talk? Not at the office. There was a longer pause this time. Then, my apartment. Tomorrow night. I'll send you the address. Only if you're comfortable. I typed back before I could overthink it. Send it. The response was immediate. An address in an upscale neighborhood across town, followed by one more message. Thank you for giving me a chance to make my case. I pocketed my phone and started walking, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and terror about what I'd just agreed to.